Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my beautiful hot messes. My name is Mistress Lavender, and today I'll be continuing reading The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F by Mark Manson, and I'm on chapter 2, Happiness is a Problem. Are you ready? It's on page 23. About 2,500 years ago, in the Himalayan foothills of present-day Nepal, there lived in there lived in a great palace a king who was going to have a son. For this son, the king had a particularly grand idea. He would make the child's life perfect. The child would never know a moment of suffering. Every need, every desire would be accounted for at all times. The king built high walls around the palace, preventing the king from knowing the outside world. He spoiled the child, lavishing him with food and gifts, surrounding him with servants who catered to his every whim. And just as planned, the child grew up ignorant of the routine realities of human existence. All of the prince's childhood went like this, but despite the endless luxury and opulence, the prince became kind of pissed kind the prince became a kind of pissed off young man. Soon every experience felt empty and valueless. The problem was that no matter what his father gave him, it never seemed enough, never meant anything. So late one night, the prince snuck out of the palace to see what is beyond its walls. He had a servant drive him through the local village, and what he saw horrified him. For the first time in his life, the prince saw human suffering. He saw sick people, old people, homeless people, people in pain, even people dying. The prince returned to the palace and found himself in a sort of existential crisis, not knowing how to process what he'd seen. He got all emo about everything and complained a lot. And as is so typical of young men, the prince ended up blaming his father for all the things his father had tried to do for him. It was the riches, the prince thought, that had made him so miserable, that had made life seem so meaningless. He decided to run away. But the prince was more like his father than he knew. He had grand ideas too. He wouldn't just run away, he would give up his royalty, his family, and all of his possessions and live in the streets, sleeping in dirt like an animal. There, he would starve himself, torture himself, and beg for scraps of food from strangers for the rest of his life. The next night, the prince snuck out of the palace again, this time never to return. For years, he lived as a bum, a discarded and forgotten remnant of society. The dog S word caked in the bottom of the social totem pole. And as planned, the prince suffered greatly. He suffered through disease, hunger, pain, loneliness, and decay. He confronted the brink of death itself, often limited to eating a single nut each day. A, a few years went by, then a few more, and then nothing happened. The prince began to notice that this life of suffering wasn't all that it was cracked up to be. It wasn't bringing him the insight he had desired. It wasn't revealing any deeper mystery of the world or its ultimate purpose. In fact, the prince came to know what the rest of us have always known, that suffering totally sucks. And it's not necessarily that meaningful either. And as with being rich, there is no value in suffering when it's done without purpose. And soon the prince came into the conclusion that his grand idea, like his father's, was in fact a effing terrible idea, and he should probably go do something else instead. Totally confused, the prince cleaned himself up and went and found a big tree near the river. He decided that he would sit under the tree and not get up until he came up with another grand idea. As the legend goes, the confused prince sat under the tree for 49 days. We won't devolve into the biological viability of sitting in the same spot for 49 days, but let's just say in that time, the prince came to a number of profound realizations. One of the realizations was this, that life itself is a form of suffering. The rich suffer because of their riches. The poor suffer because of their poverty. People without a family suffer because they have no family. People with a family suffer because of their family. People who pursue worldly pleasures suffer because of their worldly pleasures. People who abstain from worldly pleasures suffer because of their abstinence. This isn't to say that all suffering is equal. Some suffering is certainly more painful than other suffering, but we all most suffer nonetheless. Years later, the prince would build his own psychology psychology and share it to the world, philosophy and share it to the world. And this would be its first and central tenet, that pain and loss are inevitable, and we should let go of trying to resist them. The prince would later become known as the Buddha. And in case you haven't heard of him, he's kind of a big deal. There is a premise that underlies a lot of our assumption and beliefs. The premise is that happiness is algorithm whatever, that it can be worked for and earned and achieved, as if it's getting accepted to law school or building a really complicated Lego set. If we achieve X, then I can be happy. If I look like Y, then I can be happy. If I can be with a person like Z, then I can be happy. This premise, though, is the problem. Happiness is not a solvable equation. Dissatisfaction and unease are inherent parts of human nature and, as we'll see, necessary components to creating consistent happiness. The Buddha argued this from a theological and whatever perspective. I will make the same argument in this chapter, but I will make it from a biological perspective and with pandas. The Misadventures of Disappointment Panda. If I could invent a superhero, I would invent one called Disappointment Panda. He would wear a cheesy eye mask and a shirt with a capital T on it. That is way too small for his big panda belly. And his superpower would be to tell people harsh truths about themselves that they needed to hear but didn't want to accept. He would go door to door like a Bible salesman and ring doorbells and say things like, sure, making a lot of money makes you feel good, but it won't make your kids love you. Or if you have to ask yourself if you trust your wife, then you probably don't. Or what if what you consider friendship is really just your constant attempts to impress people? Then he'd tell the homeowner to have a nice day and saunter on down the next house. It would be awesome and sick and sad and uplifting and necessary. After all, the greatest truths in life are usually the most unpleasant to hear. Disappointment Panda would be the hero that none of us would want, but all of us would need. He'd be the he'd be the provert whatever vegetables in our mental diet of junk food. He'd make our lives better despite making us feel worse. He'd make us stronger by tearing us down, brightening our future by showing us the darkness. Listening to him would be like watching a movie where the superhero dies in the end. You love it even more despite making you feel horrible, but it feels real. So while we're here, allow me to put on my disappointment panda mask and drop another unpleasant truth on you. We suffer for the simple reason that suffering is biologically useful. It is nature's preferred agent for inspiring change. We have evolved to always live with a certain degree of dissatisfaction and insecurity, because it's the mildly dissatisfied and insecure creature that's going to do the most work to innovate and survive. We are wired to become dissatisfied with whatever we have and dissatisfied by only what we do not have. This constant dissatisfaction has kept our species fighting and surviving, building and conquering. So, no, our own pain and misery aren't a bug of human evolution, they're a feature. Pain in all forms is our body's most effective means of spurring action. Take something as simple as stubbing your toe. If you're like me, when you stub your toe, you scream enough four-letter words to make Pope Francis cry. You also probably blame some poor inanimate object for your suffering. Stupid table, you say. Or maybe you would even go far as to question your entire interior design philosophy based on your throbbing foot. What kind of idiot would put a table there, anyways? Seriously. But I digress. That horrible stub toe induced pain that the But I digress. That horrible stub toe induced pain, the one you and I and the Pope hate so much, exists for an important reason. Physical pain is a product of our own nervous system, a feedback mechanism to give us a sense of our own physical proportions, where we can and cannot move, and what we can and cannot touch. When we exceed those limits, our nervous system duly punishes us to make sure that we pay attention and never do it again. And this pain, as much as we hate it, is useful. Pain is what teaches us what to pay attention to when we're young and careless. It helps show us that it helps show us what's good for us versus what's bad for us. It helps us understand and adhere to our own limitations. It teaches us not to F around near hot stoves or stick metal objects in electrical sockets. Therefore, it's not always beneficial to avoid pain or seek pleasure, since pain can at times be life or death important to our well being. But pain is not merely physical. As anyone who has had to sit through the first Star Wars prequel can tell you, we humans are capable of experiencing acute physiological pain as well. In fact, research has shown that our brains don't register much difference between physical pain and psychological pain. So when I tell you that my first girlfriend cheating on me and it felt like having an ice pick slowly inserting in the center of my heart, that's because, well, it hurts so much that I might as well had an ice pick slowly inserting in the center of my heart. Like physical pain, our psychological pain is an indication of something out of its equilibrium, some limitations that has been exceeded. And like our physical pain, our psychological pain is not necessarily always bad or even undesirable. In some cases, experience emotional or psychological pain can be healthy or necessary. Just like stubbing our toe teaches us to walk into a fewer tables, the emotional pain of rejection or failure teaches us how to avoid the same mistakes in the future. And this is what's so dangerous about a society that coddles itself more and more from the inevitable discomforts of life. We lose the benefits of experiencing healthy doses of pain, a loss that disconnects us from the reality of the world around us. You may salivate at the thought of a problem free life full of everlasting happiness and internal compassion. But back here on earth, the problems never cease. Seriously, problems don't end. Disappointment Pamela just dropped by. We had margaritas and he told me all about it. Problems never effing go away. He said they'd just improve. Warren Buffett's got money problems. The drug hobo down at QEE Markets got money problems. Buffett's just got better money problems than the hobo. All of life is like this. Life is essentially an endless series of problems, Mark, the panda told me. He sipped his drink and adjusted the little pink umbrella. The solution to one problem is merely creating of the next one. A moment passed, and then I wondered where the F the talking panda came from. And while we're at it, who made these margaritas? Don't hope for a life without problems, the panda said. There's no such thing. Instead, hope for a life full of good problems. And with that, he set his glass down, adjusted his sombrero, and sauntered off into the sunset. Happiness comes from solving problems. Problems are constant in life. When you solve your health problem by buying a gym membership, you create new problems. Like having to get up early to the gym on time, sweating like a M head for 30 minutes on an elliptical, and then getting showered and changed for work so you don't stink up the whole office. When you solve your problem by not spending enough time with your partner, by designating Wednesday night date night, you generate new problems, such as figuring out what to do every Wednesday that you both won't hate, making sure you have enough money for nice dinners, rediscovering the chemistry and spark the what? Rediscovering the chemistry and spark you two felt you've lost, and unraveling the logistics of effing in a small bathtub filled with too many bubbles. Problems never stop. They merely get exchanged and or upgraded. Happiness comes from solving problems. The key word here is solving. If you're avoiding your problems or feel like you don't have any problems, then you're going to make yourself miserable. If you feel like you have problems that can't solve, you will likewise make yourself miserable. The secret sauce is in the solving of the problems, not in having problems in the first place. To be happy, we need to solve something. Happiness is therefore a form of action. It's an activity, not something that is passively bestowed upon you, not something that you magically discover in a top 10 article of the Huffington Post or from any specific guru or teacher. It doesn't magically appear when you finally make enough money to add on that extra room to the house. You don't find it waiting for you in a place, an idea, a job, or even a book for that matter. Happiness is constant work in progress because solving problems is a constant work in progress. The solution to today's problems will lie in the foundation of tomorrow's problems, and so on. True happiness occurs when you find the problems you enjoy having and enjoy solving. Sometimes those problems are simple: eating good food, traveling to some new place, winning at the new video game you just bought. Other times, those problems are abstract and complicated: fixing your relationship with your mother, finding a career that you can feel good about, developing better relationships. Whatever your problems are, the concept is still the same: solve problems, be happy. Unfortunately, for some people, life doesn't feel that simple because they F things up in one way or another. I made that up. They That's because they F things up in at least one of two ways. And we're gonna stop there because I keep on messing up. But honestly, that's the whole point of reading. I want to get better at reading, so I am. So we stopped at page 32 of chapter 2, and we're gonna start at number 1, denial. I'll see you next video. Thank you for joining me. Bye.